Namaskar children, good morning. So I hope you are clear with the 6th chapter. So in the last 2 chapters we discussed about morphology and anatomy in flowering plants. Now we are going to start with the next chapter, which is chapter 7, structural organization in animals. So now we will learn about animals' structural organization. Right? I hope you know what is structure, right? So structure എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു ഓർഗാനിസമിന്റെ രൂപം, right? We will be learning how it is organized, how is the structure made of, what makes up the structure in animal. So that is what we will discuss in this chapter, right? So structural organization in animals. Let us see how the organism, how an animal is able, how is it designed structurally. That is what we will be learning. So if you take the case of very simple organisms, we are going to learn about animals, that to multicellular organism. But before we move on to multicellular organism, let us just consider the case of unicellular organisms, right? So unicellular organisms, they have a simple structure, right? They have a very simple structure and it is just made up of one single cell. And we know that this one single cell will carry out all the functions like digestion, respiration, reproduction, everything, right? But in the case of multicellular organisms, they have a complex body. So as the name says, it is multicellular, which means that they are made up of different types of cells, right? So in multicellular organisms, they have a complex body and some basic functions are carried by different groups of cells in a well-organized manner in the case of multicellular organism. Okay, so as they have a complex body design, the same basic functions are carried by different groups of cells in a organized manner. In case of multicellular organisms, all these functions like digestion, respiration, then reproduction, excretion, all these things are also carried out in multicellular organism. But all these basic functions are carried by different group of cells in a well-organized manner, right? So in case of that unicellular organism, one single cell does everything. But in case of multicellular organism, what happens, as they have complex body design, the same functions, same basic functions which are found in unicellular organism is also found in multicellular organism for its survival. But here it is not just done by one single cell, but it is done by different group of cells in an organized manner, right? So before we move on to an example, just think about how we human being and unicellular organism is formed. We know that after fertilization, zygote will be formed, right? So this is one single cell called as zygote, which develops into such a big human being, right? So think what happens to the cell. We have studied this, right? So cells will continuously carry out division process, and these divisions will lead to formation of a big organism like human beings, animals, or any other animals. Whichever animals you take, they all come from the single cell, and this single cell will continuously divide to form an organism, right? So എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഈ single cell divide ചെയ്യുന്നത്? The single cell will divide by mitosis process. They will double the number of cells in that individual, right? So as by doubling, what happens? A complete organism is formed. Clear? So this is how multicellular organisms get their structure. So it is from one single cell, different types of cells are formed, and from that a full body of an organism is formed. So now let us see an example, children. Let us take the case of Hydra and also human being. So in the case of Hydra, we know that it is a multicellular organism, but it has a very simple body design, right? It is not as complex like an animal's body, right? So the body of a very simple organism called as Hydra is made up of different types of cells, and the numbers can range about thousands, right? So most of the simple multicellular organisms, they don't have lot of cells like higher multicellular organisms like human beings and animals. So they have only lesser number of cells, but they have different type of cells in their body to carry out different functions. And if you take the case of human beings, we know that it is composed of billions of cells, and all these cells, they do not carry one single function, but they perform various functions. Clear? So it is we have different kinds of cells which will carry out different functions, right? So our body is composed of billions of cells, and they perform various functions in our body. Now, how do these cells in the body work together? See, we are saying that cells are the basic unit, and these cells have to work together to carry out all these functions like digestion, respiration, excretion, reproduction, all those things. Now, how are these cells working together to perform a function? How is it possible? So, in the case of multicellular organisms or animals, we know that cells will combine together to form tissues. So, a group of which type of cells will combine together to form tissue? A group of cells will combine together to form a tissue. So, in other words, we can say a group of similar cells along with the intercellular substances perform a specific function inside the multicellular organism. And that organization is called as the tissue. Okay, so as I said, by mitosis, different types of cells will be formed, numbers will be increasing, and all these cell types, they have different functions to do inside the living organism's body, because we have to, our body has different organs inside us, right? And we have different types of tissues inside us. So if it has to be produced, one cell has to give rise to number of cells who have capacity to form this organ, tissue and everything, right? അപ്പോൾ ആ ഒരു സിംഗിൾ സെല്ലിൽ നിന്ന് ഈ ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് ടൈപ്സ് ഓഫ് സെൽസ് വന്നാലാണ് ചില പർട്ടിക്കുലർ സെൽസ് എന്തായിട്ട് ഡെവലപ്പ് ആവും, ഹാർട്ടായിട്ട് മാറും, ആൻഡ് ചിലത് ഇറ്റ് വിൽ ചേഞ്ച് ഇൻ ടു lungs. Like that, these cells have to continuously divide and they will produce different types of cell. Okay, and from these different types of cells, they form groups. And how, what type of cells will form groups? Cells which are similar, which carries out similar functions, right? So a group of similar cells, along similar cells here means the cells which are combining together will do a specific function, right? So a group of similar cells along with intercellular substances perform a specific function, and such an organization is called as tissue. So by continuous division, many cells are formed, and these cells will group together. And how do they group together? Depending upon the function they do. They group together and they form an organized structure which is called as the tissue. Clear, children? Okay. What is tissue? A tissue is a group of similar cells having a specific function and origin, right? But there is a surprising thing which we see in this multicellular organisms. So as I said, there are few organisms who have only thousands of cells and millions of cells and billions of cells also. But it is very surprising that all these complex organisms or animals, they consist of only 4 basic types of tissues, right? So they have only 4 basic types of tissues, and these tissues are organized in specific proportion and pattern to form organs like stomach, kidney, lungs, heart, etc. Understood it? So it is a very interesting thing, right? So in these complex organisms, we are able to find only 4 basic types of tissues, right? And these tissues are organized in a specific proportion, right? So they are organized in a specific proportion, specific arrangement, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ specific arrangement is pattern, and also proportion is the amount which is needed for making an organ, right? So they the tissues are organized in a specific proportion and pattern to form an organ like stomach, lungs, heart and kidney. Clear? So how are these tissues organized? They are organized in a specific proportion and a pattern. Proportion എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അളവ് എത്രത്തോളം cells ആണ് വേണ്ടത് ആ ഒരു particular organ form ചെയ്യാൻ. Then pattern means the type of arrangement which is making up that particular organ, right? So all the organs, they have different shape and structure, right? So this is all due to the tissues which are combined, or the cells which is forming up them, right? So based on that, what happens? Different organs like lungs, heart, stomach, etc. is being formed, right? So the tissues are the one who are organized in a specific manner. And when two or more organs perform a common function by their physical or chemical interaction, they together form the organ system. Clear, children? So tissues will, cells will combine to form tissues, and these tissues will form organs inside a multicellular organisms body. Okay, cells ഉണ്ട് ഒരേ ഫംഗ്ഷൻ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഓഫ് സെൽസ് ഒരുമിച്ച് ചേർന്നിട്ട്, ഒരേ ഓറിജിൻ ഉള്ള ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഓഫ് സെൽസ് ഒരുമിച്ച് ചേർന്നിട്ട് they will form an organ. And two or more organs when they perform a common function. Example, so if you take the case of our stomach, right? Stomach and our small intestine, they help in digestion process. They do the same function, right? So when two or more organs perform a common function by either physical or chemical interaction, they will be connected to one another. That is what they are saying. If you take the case of our respiratory system, you know, we have nose, we have lungs, we have the trachea. So all these organs, they are connected to one another. So when more than two or more organs perform a common function by physical or chemical interaction, and this common function can be done either by physical interaction or by chemical interaction, right? And they together form the organ system. An example of organ systems are digestive system, reproductive system, nervous system, circulatory system. We have lot of systems. Clear? So this is how the body of an multicellular organism is organized. So what happens? There is division of labor happening inside the multicellular organism. എങ്ങനെയാണ് യൂണിസെല്ലുലാർ ഓർഗാനിസമിൽ അവർ ചെയ്യുന്ന എല്ലാ പ്രവൃത്തിയും ഒരു സിംഗിൾ സെൽ ചെയ്യുന്നത്, അതുപോലെയല്ല മൾട്ടിസെല്ലുലാറിൽ, റൈറ്റ്? സോ ദേ ആർ നോട്ട് a burden. Work is not a burden in multicellular organism because there is division of labor. Okay, അപ്പോൾ ഒരു പ്രവൃത്തി ചെയ്യണമെങ്കിൽ two or more organs will combine together to do that particular function, right? So cells, tissues, organs and organ system will split up the work in way that exhibits division of labor, and thus it contributes to the survival of the body as a whole. So this is how the human body is formed. Not only human body, all the multicellular organisms body is formed, right? So if you take the case of simple multicellular organisms, they don't have such well-developed organs, and so there are many differences, right? We will be learning about it. And if you take the case of highly developed organisms like human beings and all, we have well-developed organs, and they are very capable of doing many functions and all, right? So we'll be learning about all these. So now we are going to learn about the different 4 types of animal tissues. We said that a similar or a similarity, a surprising similar factor which we see in all complex animals, it consists of only 4 basic types of tissues, and these tissues are epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscular tissues and neural tissues. So these are the 4 basic types of tissues which is seen in complex multicellular organism, not in simple multicellular organism. These are seen in all complex animals, right? So what are the 4 basic types of tissues? Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, then muscular tissue and then neural tissues, right? So we will be learning one by one in detail. Clear, children? Let us now start with epithelial tissues.